Okay. That's not for you, that's for me. I was upstairs sitting in meditation, and then there was a knock on the door, and I thought, why is he bothering me? And he said, it's 8:20. I said, no way. And he was right. So my apologies. I usually do the sit here and ring the bell at the end of the sit so everybody comes out of their state, but nobody rang a bell for me upstairs. So the truth of it is I wasn't in some profound samadhi. I just lost track of time because my wristwatch stopped, so I pulled up my other one, put it on my wrist, but the other one hadn't been adjusted since daylight savings time. So, oh well, yeah, okay, so here we go. I'd like to claim it was an awakened state of some sort, but no. There's a famous Chan saying of cultivators who really start to connect with their spiritual nature, and they just don't have the same sense of time and space that they had before. And then the verse goes, I live in the deep mountains, I have no clock or calendar. Early or late, I keep no track of time. It's a 4-line verse. So I suppose I'll get there eventually. Okay. We're going to pick up on the chapter Prajna, chapter 2. And last week we finished to the bottom, almost the bottom of page 30. And then we'll go into the next section here. So at this point, I see there's a gathering more than we usually have tonight, and I'll just do a little bit of an intro. This is the sutra, the Sixth Patriarch Dharma Jewel Platform Sutra. It's a text that was put together by his disciples after he gave these talks, and they recorded it because he didn't write, and there was no other recording, of course, at the time, and this has been passed along, various changes or whatnot, and we have in front of us today. He was the sixth patriarch of China, and the story begins with him meeting his teacher, the fifth patriarch, the exchange that happens between them, the bestowing of the mandate to keep the teaching alive goes to him, and he goes into hiding for a number of years. We won't go into that. People still ask me about that. Someone just asked me a few days ago, how come there were so many bad dudes hanging around the fifth patriarch and at the temple? Anyhow, after he came out of hiding, he began to teach. And this chapter we're in now is a continuation of the first chapter where he described basically where it all began. It's his biographical story that he relates and his cultivation of the way. And now he's got this great assembly of people, laymen, laywomen, Confucian, Taoist, Buddhist, have come. They've heard about him, and they're asking him to give them teaching. And this first teaching he gives is on prajna, or wisdom. And so now we're at the bottom of page 30. And basically he's been saying all along that this prajna, this wisdom, is intrinsic, it's innate, it's inherent in all living beings. It's not something that exists outside our own nature. And the whole point of cultivation is to return to that, reclaim it, restore it. You don't actually restore it because it's already whole and complete, but you return to it, rediscover it, and the process for doing that is not so much an outward journey, but an inward letting go of all attachments and confused thinking. And so it's in the letting go or the dismantling of one's afflictions and attachments that leads to the natural uncovering of this nature. And so he's leading up here, and he says that's where prajna is. Prajna is not something beyond the human. It's not something metaphysical or even abstract. It's just seeing things clearly as they are and having the ability to respond and live your life accordingly. Now he says on the bottom of 30, And of course, look at the line just before that. He does two lines where he's exhorting those who are listening at this point. One, he quotes a Bodhisattva Shila Sutra, and he says, "Our original fundamental essential nature is pure. If we would just recognize our own mind and see our own nature, we will all certainly realize Buddhahood." And then he follows it up with a quote from the Vimalakirti Sutra. He says, "Just here and now, right here and now, in this moment, in your own being, regain your original mind." And now he's going on to another theme here, which is the theme we're going to get into tonight. What's the role of the teacher then? Okay, so if you just regain your original mind, it's whole and complete within, don't seek outside, then the question arises, well, isn't looking for or having a teacher a kind of then contradiction to this? So let's look at that. He says, "Good and wise friends, when I was with Venerable Master Hui Neng, I awoke as soon as I heard his words and immediately saw my original nature as it truly is." This he's referring to the earlier part where he describes his encounter with the teacher. Hui Neng is the fifth patriarch that he studied with. And he is referring to this moment after he had been at the monastery for quite a while, and we don't know exactly, the text doesn't exactly tell us what he was doing. He was cultivating himself. That's all we know. And it wasn't, how should we say it? It wasn't just listening to text, largely doing physical labor and using the physical labor as a form of concentrating himself, bringing his attention to focus. He was threshing rice grains in the back. And he was also in the back because the fifth patriarch was trying to protect him from attention, because when he first came in, it was evident that although he was a country bumpkin, literally an illiterate, unkempt wood gatherer, and we probably know, or suspect we know, that he might have had darker skin, not being of the central Chinese Han, or maybe just because he'd been working outside for so long in the sun, his skin was darker. I was really amazed the first time I went to Asia, and I grew up where you use umbrellas when it rains, and every place I was going, it was beautiful days, and everybody, especially the women, had umbrellas. And I asked why this was, and it's because they didn't want to lose their fair skin. So fair skin was something, and of course, in the West here, my sisters used to go out the first spring and slather themselves with things that would turn their skin dark. So in any event, I don't know why his skin was darker. Perhaps it was for that reason. He has this encounter with the fifth patriarch when he first comes in. And you all remember this, right? Let's just look at that briefly because it's kind of interesting. Right, page 8. Page 8, because this will lead into this thing about the teacher. Page 8 at the bottom, he says, he hears a line from this text called the Vajra Sutra, and he doesn't hear it from a Dharma master. There's some layman who's talking about it outside as he's delivering wood, and that one line triggers something, triggers a profound feeling of understanding in him, and he wants to go and learn more about this. And yet he's taking care of his mother alone because the father is now dead, and he's her own sole support. So he makes arrangement, he says, for my mother, and then I left immediately to go, and I came to that temple, and I bowed to this fifth patriarch when I came there, and he said, "Where are you from, and what do you seek?" And I replied, "Your disciple is a commoner from Xin province in Lingnan, and I've come from a vow to bow to you, and I seek only to be a Buddha, nothing else." Boom. So this is it. Most people don't do that when they come to the monastery. This is really, you could say, brash or straightforward, or it could be very, very true. This is really what he's about. This is his inspiration. He's really clear that that's all that matters in life, is to get this nature back. Now, this is potentially his teacher. So the first part of this is we see that he himself, although he had a line of awakening that he heard, he knew or didn't trust that it was whole and complete. It wasn't sufficient. So he seeks out a good teacher. He goes to this monastery where he hears that this teacher is lecturing and teaching in this deep way. So even though he had an enlightenment experience, if you want to call it that, he still went to have it checked, certified, and perhaps even smelt it a little before just allowing himself to think, oh, I've had an awakening. And so that's why he's able to say the awakening was something to the effect of, I have this Buddha nature whole and complete within me, although I haven't completely realized it. That was his inspiration. So that's what he says to him. Now the patriarch doesn't say to him, that's great, I wish more people came here with that intention. He says, if you're from Lingnan, you must be a barbarian. So Lingnan is basically the south, and also the backward area according to this cultural prejudice or whatever is current. We don't have anything like that in our culture, of course. We never say the South is in the North. Okay. So he says in reply, people may come from the North or they may come from the South, but fundamentally there's no North or South to the Buddha nature. Whoa. The body of a barbarian, meaning me, and that of the High Master are not the same, but what difference is there in our Buddha nature? What difference in our fundamental mind? Whoa. Okay, so now to understand, the patriarch then wanted to continue this conversation, because this is a very interesting disciple. But there's a bunch of people gathering, and so he didn't. And he told them just to go in the back and do some work. And Hui Neng at this time, this young disciple, doesn't realize the conversation's over. He's really excited because he gets this back and forth and he wants to go on. And so he says, go off and do some work in the back with the group. But he thinks this is a Chan question. Or he thinks, no, let's keep going. I came here, I'm really urgent. He says, I, Hui Neng, wants to inform the High Master that wisdom is always active in this disciple's mind, and I never depart from the essential nature. What work would you have me do? He's thinking work is, some metaphor. And the patriarch says, then the patriarch has to get, he says, whoa, you are a barbarian. You really have a sharp tongue. Go back to the grain and get to work, and that's the end of it. And he's probably wondering, why did he get scolded at this point? The reason largely is from the text here, as we find out later. There's a sense in this monastery, because the fifth patriarch is well known and established as a high master, there's a kind of a passing on of the baton, so to speak. This one, in case it's a robe and bowl, to the next person. In the people's minds, many of the people's minds of this monastery, they didn't see it as a necessary fruit or result of their own intrinsic practice, but they saw it or coveted it because it was a sign of power, privilege, and prestige in an ecclesiastical setting. And so they were hungry for that. And they were always watching for the competition, right? So everybody's watching who sat longer, who bowed, longer. Who did the patriarch give a nod to or say, very good work? Because they wanted to know where they stood in the running for what they thought, the running for this competition. And so when this person comes in, he's completely the new kid on the block, and nobody knows what to make of him. He looks like he's not qualified because he's illiterate, he's dirty. Monks at that time didn't do very much work. A little work around gardening or whatnot, but mostly washing their robes and sitting in meditation. So their hands and their skin weren't necessarily coarse or tattered as his was. And so in many ways, he didn't look like it. But this exchange, that set a bell off. Anybody who was there, and the more people that gathered, the more nervous the fifth patriarch got, and so he just got rid of him to protect him. Okay, now we go ahead, and you go a couple more pages, and he's working, he's doing his work, and then one evening later on, the fifth patriarch calls him to his room and feels that he's ready now for completing his awakening experience, however we want to work with that. And so he begins by discussing or reading a sutra to him, the very sutra that he heard the first line from. But now he's contextualizing the whole thing. He's starting this diamond or the Vajra Sutra from the beginning, but because Hui Neng has been cultivating himself really deeply in some way, when he gets to the line again, this time, and that's on page 15, he has a most profound understanding. Finally, everything is very, very crystal clear, and he says, how unexpected. And the unexpected is a really key line here because it means it's not something you get through effort of mind or even will. It's not like a math puzzle you work on, and then finally you have the breakthrough. It's when your mind is not attending to trying to get it that the texts say, unexpected, the news arrives. And so because he was so focused and concentrated, because he had cultivated such purity, when he hears the line, unexpected, without any intention, spontaneously, so to speak, he sees clearly and he speaks this. Now what happens? The fifth patriarch kicks him out. But he doesn't kick him out, he sends him on his way. He sends him on his way for reasons that I think will come up in what we're doing tonight here. One is, he obviously realizes he is, I don't want to do the matrix thing, the one, so I'm not going to say that. He is one capable of receiving, maintaining, and carrying on this teaching. But because of the competition that is, to this point, really almost violent, and we see it can get violent after this, he wants to send him on his way for his own safety. So he does, and then the fifth patriarch doesn't show up in the assembly for a couple days, giving him a head start. And then the action begins for this part. We're not going to go into tonight. They chase him down and so on and so forth. And then he goes into hiding. But he also sends him away because his job is done. His job as the teacher is done. He has helped him cultivate. He's brought him to a stage where his understanding was ripe. And through a number of various devices that he tossed out, suddenly it clicked. The sixth patriarch now totally understood, and there was no reason for the relationship to continue. It was over. Now he was to go on. So now we get to tonight's passage. I wanted to give you that context. So he says, when I was with the Venerable Master, I awoke when I heard those words. That is why I'm conveying this teaching in practice, so that students of the way may directly awaken and realize bodhi, or awakening, wisdom. Each of you look into your own mind and see your original nature yourself. Directly awaken. Directly here means for yourself and by yourself. It means within your own mind, within your own nature, for and by yourself. That's what directly means here, and that's his teaching, is a direct teaching. So he's saying, do this. However, now we get the next line. If you are unable to awaken on your own, you must seek out a good and wise teacher, someone who understands the Dharma of the Supreme Vehicle and can show you the right way. A good and wise teacher who has the background and an affinity with you can transform and guide you, leading you to see your original nature. This is because a good and wise teacher is able to stimulate all good dharmas. All Buddhas of the past, present, and future, as well as the 12 divisions of the sutras, are originally inherent, whole, and complete within human nature. If you cannot understand on your own, you must seek a good and wise advisor who can lead you to see. If you are someone who can awaken on your own, however, do not seek outside. Okay, so if we pause there, this is a really interesting passage because the good and wise advisor is Sanskrit, it's Kalyana Mitra, and literally means, I'm looking at you because you know our Sanskrit better than anybody here.
Literally good friend.
Literally a good friend. But this is not like Facebook. I'm going to friend you, you're going to friend me, or okay. This is a friend who is a friend in the Dharma, and more specifically, a friend who can be a mentor to you. So different ways here in Chinese it's shan zhi shi, and that's we translate. They literally say good, knowing, sure advisor. Really, something closer would be a good and virtuous mentor, a spiritual teacher, someone who's trustworthy, exemplary. So the good has to do with their virtue, with their goodness. This is not someone who's driven by ulterior motives or has an ego. And the knowing has to do with not only they know the teachings really well, but they embody them. So it's not just an intellectual knowledge, it's an embodied knowledge. And the knowing also implies they know you. So it's like they have all of these qualities. They know the teachings, they know themselves, and they know you and your potentials, and that's why they can skillfully direct their teachings. So it's in a sense, it's like a very seasoned, high-level physician who can really do skillful diagnosis, dispense the medicine, has no ulterior motives whatsoever, and really can diagnose you properly. So this is why he's saying this is a good and wise advisor. And they can transform you, but they lead you to see. This is the key. They don't give you this original nature. They can't give you awakening, but they lead you to see it. That's why there's a famous passage in the Dhammapada that says something to the effect, no one liberates you or awakens you but yourself. No one can, no one may. You yourself must walk the path. Buddhas only show the way. In other words, a Buddha, a sage, a good and wise advisor can only point it out and maybe point out what's in the way of you getting there. I told you the story earlier about when I first came in, my teacher didn't ask me, where are you from, what do you seek? And I didn't have a chance to say, I only seek Buddhahood. But I'm pretty close, so just give me a little edge or nudge. He pointed to my arrogance, which was very upsetting to me because I didn't think I had any. But in that way, he was a good and wise advisor because he was pointing to the thing that stood in the way of me seeing things clearly, which was myself, ironically. And it took me a while to absorb that. But that's what a skilled physician or advisor can do. They point right to that spot where you don't see it yourself, where hubris or whatnot covers it over, or habituation covers it. So, but he says here, he's working with the apparent contradiction. He says, of course, not only are all the sutras, all the teachings, and all the Buddhas of the past, present, future complete and whole within human nature. This is a really interesting statement. It's a view of human nature that is not seen it as deficient or lacking or depraved, but naturally whole and complete. Everything arises from this nature. All Buddhas come from the human, from perfecting the human. They don't come from outside the human. But he says, if you can't understand on your own, then you must seek out this good and wise advisor who can lead you to see. Now he says, if you are someone who can awaken on your own, then don't seek outside. Don't seek for this advisor. And then it's a very key line. He says, don't think that I'm saying that you can only gain liberation through a good and wise advisor, other than yourself. This would be mistaken. It would be, he's recognizing this would be a contradiction. Why? Within your own mind, there's a good advisor who can awaken you yourself. This is a beautiful passage. So what he's saying is, if you've lost that good advisor within, he or she is still there, by the way. They can't go, or it wouldn't be the good and wise advisor. So the good and wise advisor is whole and complete within, but you can't see, you can't hear. Why? Because they have a really soft voice and they're teeny weeny. No, because the eyes and the ears are engaged with other things and don't attend to it. It's really interesting. And I'm saying this as a psychological as well as spiritual. There is an understanding, if you want to say maybe like intuition we all have, a sensibility that is faster than thought. And then we know which way to move and go. But because of desires, cravings, fears, anxieties, we cover that over and we start to listen to second and third voices, fourth and fifth voices. We don't trust it. And by not trusting it, we weaken it. We make it atrophy. And it becomes as if it's not there anymore. Or only in certain moments do we get a sense of, oh, there it is again. And then we can stop it, we don't listen to it. So getting back to listening to the good knowing advisor within, once that's loud and clear again, you don't need one without. But if you've lost that sense, if you can't hear that anymore, or hear it really clearly, then the external good and wise advisor sort of mirrors it, or if you say echoes it for yourself. And so it's a catalyst rather than a savior. And a catalyst is something that stirs or stimulates the response and then leaves. So that's why this is really important. And then he goes on and he says, why would it be, I'm interposing this question, that you wouldn't be able to do it? If you let yourself morally stray, become confused, confounded, and all mixed up with wrong thinking, then even if a good and wise advisor gives you instruction, he will not be able to help you. If you return to what is correct and true, centered within your own being, use prajna to contemplate and illuminate, then in an instant all your confused thinking will vanish. You will recognize your essential nature in one moment of awakening, and then you will attain a Buddha. So he's saying, on one hand, it's whole, it's complete, it's ready there, but it may not be operating fully. And the reason it's not operating fully is because we've allowed ourselves to get lost, confused. So to speak, the garden covered with weeds. And so the return here is, first of all, the recognition that I'm not whole and complete. Something's not gelling with my life and my purpose and my meaning. And that impulse is the beginning to start to attune, to listen to oneself, to reset priorities, to get rid of what is not genuine, authentic, wholesome, leading to your fullness of being. And sometimes the outside advisor is the catalyst that serves us. So I wanted to point this out because on one hand it would seem a contradiction to say you need that, but he clearly, I think, deals with that and explaining it's not absolutely necessary, but it might be necessary if you're confused, but even if it's necessary, it won't be sufficient, because all that advisor can do is point out that way. Then you have to complete that on your own. So this is what's called the Kalyana Mitra, the good advisor. I was going to talk just a little bit about that with some examples, some from the records we have and some from personal experience, just to sort of highlight how that might work. There's a famous Buddhist text called the Shurangama Sutra, on which a young and fairly advanced spiritually practicing disciple, Ananda, messes up. I mean, he's got profound intellectual understanding, but it hasn't been internalized yet. And he hasn't understood his deepest emotions and his feelings and impulses, so he gets himself in a jam. I mean, I'm not going to do the whole sutra for tonight. And he's such in a jam, he doesn't know he's in a jam. That's a real jam. And so the Buddha sends Manjushri, I think, is it Manjushri, right? Sends Manjushri, the Bodhisattva, to rescue Ananda. He's about to, if you see it as a movie, he's about to go up the cliff. And Manjushri arrives and brings him back, and and Ananda's like, wow, what happened? What? And the Buddha said, indeed, what happened? How did you get so confused? The Buddha then becomes the good advisor. And he takes Ananda through a series of questions, pretty pressing. He pushes. And Ananda keeps coming back, and there's this really interesting dialogue, till finally he breaks down Ananda's sort of pretensions and confusion about what he knows and says, basically, Ananda, you've just been studying, but you haven't really cultivated in the deep recesses of your being where all actions arise from, not from thought necessarily, but from these emotions and impulses unchecked. Whoa. And Ananda then says, I give up. What do I do? Because he starts by saying, Ananda, what are you doing? I'm cultivating my mind. Oh, really? Where's your mind? Well, it's inside. And the Buddha says, blah, blah, blah. He says, well, no, come to think of it's outside. And the Buddha goes, blah, blah, blah. And he says, well, it's neither inside nor outside. And this just goes round and round till Ananda says, I give. I don't know where my mind is. I have no idea where my mind is. I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing. Please help me. Then the Buddha begins to teach him. But in the end, the teaching is always towards giving Ananda the power tools he needs to then work on it himself. And it's a happy ending. Okay? So that's one example. I mentioned this before, I'll just cite another one. The famous forest monk who really is credited with reviving the forest tradition in Southeast Asia, a cultivator called Ajahn Mun or Acharya Mun. And Ajahn Mun was the teacher of Ajahn Tate and Ajahn Lee, and progressively even the forest tradition now as it's coming out of Thailand and in the United States. And he revived what's called the forest tradition. But he just went in, basically, to cut to the chase, went in and cultivated and meditated on his own without access to the Tripitaka, in other words, the texts, and without access to a teacher. And I won't go into the details, but he had some really incredible states of altered consciousness. I mean, he could leave his body and go all these realms, go to the heavens and explore. He could see others' thoughts. He could go into mountains, and just incredible stuff happened to him. But he realized after a while that it wasn't producing insight and calm. But he said, I was a spiritual sightseer. He would meditate and then go off multi-channel surfing, so to speak, into the spiritual realm and just be exhausted by it and come back utterly wasted, and then do it again and do it again, because he was adventurous and he had this desire to go into these places and explore once the power of his mind started to come back. And finally he realized that this was not going anywhere, and he had a turnaround. But after reflecting on this, he said, how much time have I wasted not having a good and wise teacher? How much time have I wasted not being able to deeply study the text? Which, by the way, the Buddha himself said after I'm gone, because again, I think it was Ananda came to the Buddha when the Buddha is about to leave, and Ananda says, you're going, who would you take as a teacher? And the Buddha said, when I'm gone, don't despair, Ananda. It's not like you won't have a teacher. Take the Dhamma Vinaya as your teacher. Take the discipline and the teachings as your teacher. So in this case, Ajahn Mun realized he didn't have a teacher directly, nor did he have access to the text. And he said, had I had these, I would not have wasted so much time. So here's another example of someone who's really cultivating. The other one I'll mention is the famous teacher Shu Yun, who's also, I guess you'd translate his name, Empty Cloud. And he was one of the teachers of my teacher. And he too, early on, when he was 18 or 19, really wanted to do this and went off and cultivated. But I'll read you this passage just to give you a short. So he went off into the mountains to really do this. I tried this too when I was, 21 or 22. I didn't have the same state as he did. I just confronted my mind and realized I did not know what I was doing at all. I just thought I could go up into the Sierras, sit under a pine tree, cross my legs, and do what the Buddha did in Bodh Gaya. And all I met was this monkey that was running me rampant called my mind. I had no way to control it. So then I knew maybe I should find a teacher. So he goes off and he says, and I'm quoting from his autobiography, by the 31st year, this is a framing, he was already renowned for his meditation skills. He was living deep in the mountains. He was subsisting on pine needles and mountain stream water. And these are not organic Trader Joe's pine needles. These are ones you go and get off the tree one by one. His hair and beard grew to over 1 foot in length. He didn't cut his hair or his nails. His eyes showed with a piercing radiance. People reported this. And I've seen cultivators who have these qualities that more often than not frighten people. So, if you're going through the woods, tra-la-la, with the kids on a picnic, and you see this guy with the long hair and the beard, glowing eyes, you're going, whoa, okay. And here's his own report. He said, I had many unusual experiences. Deep in the mountains and marshy land, I was not attacked by tigers or wolves, nor was I bitten by snakes or insects. I neither craved for human sympathy, nor took the cooked food normally given by people. Lying on the ground with the sky above me, I felt that the myriad things were complete in myself. I experienced a great joy as if I were a god of the boundless freedom from all impediments. Thus my mind was clear and at ease, and my strength grew with each passing day. My eyes and ears became sharp and penetrating, and I walked with rapid steps as if I were flying. It seemed inexplicable how I came to be in such a condition. As there were many mountains to stay on and wild herbs to eat, I started wandering from place to place, and thus passed the year oblivious of time. No. Okay. So, sounds pretty cool. Sounds right. Now, the text, it wasn't until he came upon an old Chan master who was wandering through, a fellow named Yang Jing, and he was on this mountain doing this, and he said, did I get a correction for my weak spot? And that's the word he used. And what was the correction? It was the Shurangama Sutra. So the old master asked him, and here's their conversation. First, the old master says to him, have you been ordained? And why would he ask him that? Ordained means, did he take the precepts and become a monk? Precepts would have been because he's looking at him. If you ordain, you shave your head and your beard, and you have a kind of deportment. This is a wild man of the mountains. So he's like saying, have you ordained? And he said, I've received the full ordination. And then he said, how long have you been in this condition? And as I related my story, he asked, who instructed you to practice in this way? And I replied, I did it because the ancients attained enlightenment by means of such austerities. And he asked, you know that the ancients disciplined their bodies, but do you know they also disciplined their minds? He further added, as I see your current practice, you're like a heretic and entirely on the wrong path. You've wasted 10 years of training. If by staying in the grotto and drinking water from mountain streams you manage to succeed in living 10,000 years, you'd only be one of the 10 classes of rishis, these are mortals, listed in the Shurangama Sutra, and still be far away from the Tao. And even if you manage to advance a further step, thus realizing the first fruit, you'd only be a self-enlightened fellow, a Pratyeka Buddha. If your method merely consists of abstaining from cereals and not wearing trousers, it is only a quest for the extraordinary. How can you expect such a practice to result in perfect awakening? And so he says, thus the old master pierced my weak spot right to the core, admitted Shu Yun. He bowed to the old master and begged him for instructions. And then after that, the master told him to study deeply and understand the Shurangama Sutra. He went back, shaved, everything, did this, and the rest is an interesting story we won't go into tonight. But again, I'm trying to point to this turnaround that happens as a result of a good and wise instructor. So, but each one, how the masters work is different. There's a wonderful text. Some consider it a sutra to itself. That's its name. It's called the Gandavyuha Sutta. And some consider it a chapter as part of the Sutra of the Avatamsaka Sutra, and then it's called Entering the Dharma Realm, Rufajie. But however you regard it, it's this wonderful epic tale of this young pure youth called Sudana, or good wealth, who is seeking awakening and wants to understand how you do it. And so he's told he should seek out good and wise advisors, these Kalyana Mitras. And so he begins his journey. He goes to this Bodhisattva Manjushri, and Manjushri says, good indeed, you're on your way. Go to this advisor to the south and tell him I sent you, here's my card, something like that sort of thing. I introduce you, and ask him your questions, and he will help you, or she will help, because it's mixed, all kinds of advice. And he goes through more than 50 of these in sequence. And it's really one of these epic journeys. And he's cute. This guy's really, the portrayals of him, I don't know what he's really portrayed as not harsh, not martial. And he's always bent a little like this with his palms together and say, could you teach me? Would you tell me how to do this? And so he bows to each one. He stays with them. They give them wonderful advice and wisdom. And he never wants to leave. He wants to stay. And right when they know he's got what they got to offer, they say, now it's time for you to leave. And he cries. He's absolutely upset about having to leave them. And they say the teaching is the teaching of non-attachment. You need to go on. It's time. But don't be sad because you're going to a really good one. This woman over here really knows much more than I do. So go off to her. And then he scoots off, goes to the next one, bows. And he goes through over 50 of these. And where does he end up? His last advisor? Manjushri, the one he started with. So he does this complete circle. And it's metaphorically very interesting because it reinforces it's always been within whole and complete. And all they're doing is triggering it, getting him to remember. And he comes back in the reaffirmation, he's back with Manjushri again. And he's like, and this is where he then has his profound awakening. So in this case, he's welcomed. There's no scolding. In the case of Hui Neng, there's a scolding. Ajahn Mun has regrets. I'll tell you a short one of mine. I got both scolded. The first I came in, I got scolded. One time I was down in the dumps, really sort of almost depressed at how hard it was going to be for me to get out of my afflictions and accumulated bad habits. And I was just sitting there like Rodin's great thinker, like, oh gosh, this is terrible. I was in an inner room of the monastery with a kitchen. And my teacher came in, and he just walked around me quietly 3 times. And I'm like, what's he doing? We didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And then when he finished walking around the 3rd time, he just started walking on. And as he walked out, I had this feeling or thought in my mind, everything's okay, no problem. And I was just totally uplifted. And he just turned and smiled and walked out. So I went back in. And I was lifted from the dregs. And then a couple of years later, my practice seemed to be advancing. And I broke through my pain gate in meditation. And once I broke through the pain gate, I felt almost like Hui Neng, really buoyant and happy. And I was giddy, excited. I thought, I've got it. I'm so happy. Nothing's wrong. And I remember coming out of the Chan Hall. I was walking around the corner, just bouncing around like Tinkerbell. And my teacher's coming the other way. And I'm going, I wait till he sees me. He's going to be so happy for me. And he comes up and he scowls and his face goes, what are you doing? And he says, drunk again. And he hits me on the head and walks away. And then, the whole state went flat. And I thought, oh, I guess that wasn't true state I had. So from the depths, he brought me up, and from the heights, he brought me down. And the last story I tell you, because I'm still pondering it, we traveled together to Southeast Asia, and we were in Malaysia. This was back in the 70s. And the master was invited to give this talk at a temple, and there was 1,500 people or so there. He had asked Heng Shui and I to come with him, and it's the first time I'd ever been to the Buddhist world in Asia. And having studied with him, I was expecting people doing meditation and discussing text and having philosophy and so forth. And when I went, I was totally blown away to this temple because the incense smoke was so thick you couldn't breathe. I mean, there was hundreds of sticks of incense in the air. Like I did one up here, but if I did one by one, you'd all come up with a big wad. I'm talking about 50 at a time. Light them, stick them in. You do 50, you do 50, you do 60 because she did 50. More merit and virtue if you do 60. And this whole thing, and the fires, it would catch on fire. So they'd have to spray water to take it out, take the incense out, and this kept going. And so this beautiful temple with all these beautiful statues were now ochre colored, for after the years of the smoke, they were covered with that dark ochre color. And then on that altar, there was dead chickens and bottles of wine. I'm going, before Guanyin Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of Great Compassion, I'm thinking, Great Compassion, dead chick, what's going on here? And then I looked in the corner, and people were huddled in the corner and like shaking dice with these things. And they were dice, they were these fortune sticks, and they would shake the stick, and whatever stick popped out, then you'd look and see if that was your fortune. And it's like, then I went outside, and they were burning papier-mâché boats and airplanes and cars and condos, papier-mâché ones, and they're burning huge wads of monopoly-like money, not real money, but paper money. And I was going, what was that for? And that's, well, because our ancestors have gone to the underworld, and they need to bribe the officials to get through, so they need this money. We're sending it down to them. And we're also sending them these houses and boats and things like this so they can take them with them to the Pure Land and be comfortable. And I'm going, whoa. So I'm thinking, this is not what I expected Buddhism to be. I wonder what my teacher's going to do here. And so basically his talk was one by one, take these things apart. He would, why are you burning paper money? He said, why don't you burn real money? If you earn real money, you might break your attachments and have some merit and virtue. You're burning paper money, it doesn't help you. Moreover, since the ghosts and spirits are material, what does it help them? So he just went through every one. He says, this is superstitious. He says, dead ducks, dead chickens for Guanyin Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of Great Compassion? Are you joking? So that one was taken out. Let's see what else was there. Oh, the incense. He says it's symbolic. One sniff of incense is just to symbolize a purity of the mind. 100,000 of them doesn't symbolize anything but greed. He says, so you think if you give something nice to somebody and they like it, you give more, it's better. But then you're insulting the Buddha because you think one incense he likes, 10 he'd be happier with. So you're calling the Buddha greedy, which is, And so by the time he finished, there was like 40 people left. All these people walked out. So the next day, and I felt okay. I thought, wow, because I was getting worried here. So the next day, it was an old temple, and you had to wash up outside in a kind of basin thing. And I was there washing up, and the master came next to me, and I was a little nervous. And he was washing up. So and he said, well, Gu Ting, what'd you think of that talk last night? I thought, well, it was not easy for people to hear, but I was glad you said it. Why were you glad? I said, well, I kind of grew up in that religious tradition when I was a kid. It was like a lot of superstition. I thought Buddhism would be different. He said, oh. He said, well, even though they left, I could not say it. I had to say it. And then I said, and I'm really glad you did, and that's why I'm following you, teacher. And he took his towel and he whapped me over the head. He said, don't follow me, follow wisdom. And he walked away. And as I say, I'm still contemplating that one. But it sounded to me yet another teaching of an advisor who's saying the point is not to cling to the good and wise advisor, but follow what the advisor's following. Go after what he or she is going after rather than clinging to them. So I just thought I'd share some of these tonight to illustrate this teaching. And there is a line from the Avatamsaka which says, trying to find these teachers is rare. It's been rare and hard in the past, and it's rare and hard in the present. And then the text says, it's as easy as finding phoenixes and unicorns. So, I'll leave you with that thought. We will stop there for tonight. Continue next week into chapter 2. Are there any announcements need to be made?
So, we'd just like to announce that this summer, in the second week of June, we'll have a retreat up in the Oregon forest called Buddha Root Farm. So it's a week of camping under the trees, meditation, studying.
With pine needles and water, right?
The food is actually pretty good. The food is pretty good. But yeah, it's a very, very nice retreat. Mostly will be conducted in English, and we try to make it friendly to people who are also new to the Dharma. So if families are very welcome, young and old. So if you are interested to find out more, the website is oregon.berkeleymonastery.org, or you can talk to me or any of the kind of old timers here. So thank you.
Be prepared. There's very little to no cell phone reception up there. So if you're going to have withdrawal symptoms, try to do them before you go up. Unplug. Okay, we usually transfer the goodness of tonight's gathering to wherever you want to transfer it out. It's a wish to give it back into the world. So we recite a verse and bow and do that. It's in English, so those of you who would like and don't know it in English, maybe Mark, could you hand out some copies? Okay.
How
Sambhav